The exploits of the judges have had their fair share of gore already, but be warned, the events in today's story are even more gruesome. You should certainly preview this story before showing it to your kids. After Joshua and his whole generation died, another generation grew up who didn't know God or what he'd done for the Israelites. They abandoned God, who'd rescued them from Egypt, and copied the immoral practices of the nations around them. This is Storytime with Josh, and these are the exploits of the judges. In the days of the judges, the Israelites didn't have a king. Now, it was fairly common in that culture for a man to have a concubine, which was a sort of second-class wife. He'd take care of her, and in some ways she was like a wife, but in other ways she was more like a servant. One time, an Israelite man had a concubine, but after a while she left him and ended up back at her parents' place in another town. After 4 months, the man decided to try and win back her heart, so he took a servant and some donkeys and he travelled to her parents' place. When he arrived, her father said, "Come in, be our guest." So he stayed there for 3 days, and her father gave him everything he needed. On the 4th day, the man said, "Today, your daughter and I will travel back to my home." Her father said, "Well, have something to eat for the journey." So they sat down and ate and drank, and before he knew it, it was afternoon. "You know, we really should get going. Why don't you stay another night here? It'll be fun." So the man gave in and stayed another night. On the 5th day, the man said, "Today, your daughter and I will travel back to my home." Her father said, "Well, have something to eat for the journey." So they sat down and ate and drank, and before he knew it, it was afternoon. "We really should get going. Why don't you stay another night here? It'll be fun. You can leave in the morning." "No, I've stayed here too long already. We're going to leave now." So he got his servant and his concubine, and they began travelling back home. After a few hours, the servant said, "There's a town over there. How about we stay there for the night?" The man said, "No, that's not an Israelite town. It'll be better for us if we stay in an Israelite town, like Gibeah." So they kept travelling. Around sunset, they arrived in Gibeah, and they stopped in the town square. But no one offered them a place to stay for the night. Eventually, an old man came along on his way home from work. "What are you doing here?" he said. "Well, we're travelling back to my home, and we've got enough food and drink, but no one offered us a place to stay for the night." "Oh, you can stay at my place, and I'll provide food and drink. But whatever you do, don't stay here in the town square." So they stayed at the old man's place, and he took care of them and gave them food and drink. Suddenly, a group of troublemakers surrounded the house and started banging louder and louder on the door. "Bring out the new guy so we can have sex with him," they yelled. "No," said the old man, "he's my guest, and what you're saying is disgusting and wrong." But they wouldn't let up, so the old man said, "Look, I have a virgin daughter and this man has a concubine. If we give them to you to do whatever, will you leave my guest alone?" But they still wouldn't listen. So the man took his concubine and pushed her out the door, and the troublemakers took turns raping her until morning. Then they let her go, and she struggled back to the house where her husband was and collapsed on the doorstep. When her husband opened the door in the morning to leave, there she was, lying on the doorstep. "Get up," he said, "let's go." But she gave no response. So he picked her up and put her body on his donkey and travelled back home. When he arrived home, he took a knife and cut her body into 12 pieces. Then he sent messengers to take the pieces out into all the parts of Israel, and everyone who saw them said, "A horrible crime has been committed, more horrible than anything we've ever heard of. We need to do something about this."